Alright guys, welcome back to part 3 of my Another Perspective design talk-through. For the next few levels, I'm probably going to try to only talk minimally about narrative elements of the game. Not because I think they're unimportant, but because, for one, I still want there to be some element of, you know, I don't want to ruin everyone's own personal interpretation of a lot of the stuff that goes on in this game by giving canonical answers to what a lot of stuff is necessarily about. I will talk briefly about what some of the questions, some things are sort of meant to be making a player ask, but largely I'm just going to be talking about the mechanical level design and where the narrative plays into that, why and how it's important. I'll probably talk a bit more about the narrative and stories, like some of the more cryptic stuff in the game at the very end, I suppose. But even then, I'll want to talk about it minimally, because, as I said, I don't... You know, if I was able to express everything this game was about in words, I wouldn't have made the video game. Like, there would have been no point. So, just putting it out there that it's mostly what I'm going to try and just to be about. Because I already recorded this whole section once, but it ended up being like a 50-minute talk of me going back and forth about the story and what it all means. But, it wasn't really the sort of thing I wanted to do with this video, so I'm recording it again from this point. Anyway, let's just sort of review mechanically what the player knows so far. They know all the basic movement, they know they can jump to about a block's height, they know they can swap to this other dude, that they see these different worlds, they know that they can stand on the other guy's head, and they know, importantly, that gravity does not remain a thing while a character is frozen. This allows them to do what I was just doing over there, which is to tower a character one on top of the other to get to heights they wouldn't otherwise be able to get to. With two of them, they can reach a height of 4 blocks, for example. And so when they swap to this other guy at the start of the room, they see that he needs to be able to get that key, and also just to be able to get out of this pit in order to be able to help him get to this key all the way up here. Now, the difference in this level, like, it uses basically the same sort of things. Like, there's a slight difference in that the player has to go underneath the thing in order to get to the other side to help this guy out. But it's all the same sort of ideas that have already really been kind of presented to the player, but just presented in a new environment, in a new shape, in a new kind of, not context, not really, but in a new environment that you just have to kind of drink in a bit first. It's not symmetrical like a lot of the previous levels were. I still do a lot of symmetrical levels from this point onwards, it's not like I've dropped that concept now. But this level is designed to be more asymmetrical and to be forcing you to start to actually think about the environment that little bit more, because it's a little bit less clear and a little bit less straightforward where you have to move to, when and why. Anyway, the player can quite reasonably assume, since they have no way of getting out of here on their own, there must be a way for this character to get over there, and there is. Quite obviously there's this little route underneath that they can take here. You know, they can jump him up there, and they need to jump him there. There's no way they can just stand to get him up, so they need to reuse that lesson of floating the guy in the air to get him up to there. Get that key, and then the role gets reversed here, where instead of this guy helping him, it's the other way around now, and the guy you were helping now has to help your character. The other character, I don't know why I'm saying like your as if you own one of the characters or whatever. You know what I mean though, and he has to help him get to this key, as opposed to the other way around. And it's just that little bit harder, because instead of just having to jump up one thing and get him up one thing, he has to go up to here and jump up and get up 3 blocks instead of 2. Strictly, that is what you did already over here, because when you were over in this pit, well, when that character, sorry, can't really get him back there now, but when that character was in this little pit area at the start, technically you are still moving up 3 blocks, but it's slightly easier because his perspective already gives you that floor, so you're already at that first height, and it's just a matter of jumping that guy up once. Whereas here you do sort of the whole the whole thing from that level, and it's just that one little half a logic step more in working that one out. And again, just the role reversal makes you just sort of have to sit and think for a minute which one you need to get where. So this level, I really like this level. You start, like, this level actually existed in the original perspective, and it's one of the few levels that was brought across largely unchanged, like minor shape difference, but it's mostly exactly the same. So the player is walking along this giant wall of blocks that like stretches down forever here. When you swap to this guy, it's a completely bottomless pit. And there's a door all the way over there, and the only there's just a bottomless pit in between, so the only thing the player is drawn to as to how they might solve this room is the fact that they have this other guy. Yeah, and they already know basically what to do here, and they know that they need to use him to get this guy across to that door. They've just never had to do it in a sense that they have to do this in multiple stages. Like, it's always been like jump across to him, jump across to the door, and then that's it. Whereas now the gap is really huge. And players can very, very quickly work out a way of doing this. What a lot of players will go to actually is a really, really safe approach, which is to start doing this sort of thing and see if that will work. And even if they do it like this, like, if some players this will feel really tedious, it is a valid solution, but because it's very sort of slow, swap, 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 okay, then get to the end kind of thing. Some players really enjoy it and don't have a problem with it at all, and for some it feels really slow and tedious. It's annoying because that's not necessarily the intended, like, when I designed this level in the first place, the solution was you do this. Which, as you can see, is far less steps and is way quicker. But as you can see, I had to show you what that was. I didn't even know how to describe in words that. And it's really hard for players to actually have the confidence to do that sort of thing immediately, because while they have already learned that when, as you can see, the character frozen there doesn't have any gravity, and it's not enough to teach the player that the character also loses all momentum after they swap. So if I jump to the right like this, when I swap to this guy, he's not going to keep moving to the right. Like, the momentum he had before when I jumped to the right is not going to stay with him, he's just going to drop straight down like that. Now, there's not really been anything in the game that that has taught that to the player, or there's no reason to expect the player to know that, which is the problem in, like, a player just kind of has to stumble upon or be brave enough to try this method of moving along, or work it out in their own heads based on everything they've done so far. And there's nothing in the game that leads them cleanly to that conclusion, which is a kind of a shame, because it's a much faster and better and ultimately probably more satisfying way of doing this level. Some players do realise that they can do that, but opt to just do this instead because it's, like, safer and easier if you're not 100% comfortable with the mechanics and the movement, and, like, or your execution just isn't, like, as good. And again, there's a little bit in here of me just being a very experienced player of platform games, and a little bit of a lack of appreciation for players who might not necessarily have the same, like, executional ability that I do. It's the thing I've minimized wherever possible in the game, but there are still elements of that linger behind in the game design, and it's a shame. But things are how they are. Ultimately, though, I still really do like this level because I think it's a really cool, not so much an aha moment like in terms of solving a puzzle, but it's this really cool reveal, I think, when they swap to this guy and it clicks in their head what has to happen with this level. Like, I've shown this level to a bunch of people a lot of times, and they've been this guy and swapped to this other guy, and they've just turned to me and gone, ah, that's clever, like, without saying anything else. Like, they've already worked out what it is they have to do, and it's very, very, I want to say concisely presented. Like, it's just this nugget of kind of truth about this gameplay universe that you can, if you have a guy who can walk along a surface like this, even though this guy doesn't have any floor at all, you had this potential for infinite horizontal movement by just doing this over and over. And there's also here, like, if you're really smart and you really think about it, the potential for a much bigger potential exploit that isn't actually that useful in the game, other than a few levels and a specific level in mystery mode that I may get to at a future point. But there is like a little bit of extra depth to this mechanic of like not having any momentum when you swap between characters, that allows you to do something that is actually potentially super powerful and is really cool and satisfying if you can figure it out. And it's not that useful in the game, unfortunately, and fortunately at the same time, because otherwise it would be crazy broken. But it does actually get used in mystery mode for like the more kind of hardcore fans of the game. Anyway, that's just a bit of a long ramble to say I'm not actually going to talk about what that is yet, but that's something I'll cover later, which I think is quite cool. So here, after doing a couple of levels where, like, you know, you had to do some executional stuff, or you had to do a bit of thinking, I wanted to introduce just a brief pause from that, and I do this quite a bit. Like, whenever there's been like a big sequence of levels where I've taught a lot of stuff to the player at once, I always like to take a moment to have a couple of the screens where you don't necessarily learn anything new mechanically, or something that's... No, that was the wrong way of putting it. Rooms where you don't have to actually... There's not really any real challenge, if you know what I mean. And you're just allowed to experience something a little bit different. Maybe I'll take the opportunity to do some narrative stuff, or just do something else, something that just kind of breaks the pattern of what you've been doing. Because I kind of want players to be able to play all the way through the game in one sitting. It's short enough for that, it's kind of designed around that experience, and it's really tough to get that with puzzle games, because it's very easy if a player gets stuck or something for them to very quickly want to say, I'll put this down, come back to it later. I tried wherever I can to kind of avoid that happening. And yeah, well, so here it's just like, this is all way too confusing, and you must screens where there's just one of me, so I've got this screen where instead of all these multiple perspectives and keys and all the stuff that you've just learned, I just brought it all back, simplified it back down, just this one dude, walk over here, go through the door, you know, just a little bit of a break from what's been going on. And the same thing here, only there's no actual doors on this screen, which makes the players just sort of stop for a second and take a look at the text that's going on the screen, because there's nothing else to look at. And it says, oh hey, can you do me a favor and just like pause the game for a second with escape and let me think? This is more fourth wall type stuff that I keep reiterating because I want the player to keep thinking about who it is they're talking to and what that person or entity knows or understands about themselves. Like, I keep wanting to make it clear that whoever it is they're talking to, or whatever it is they're talking to, realizes that it's part of a video game and realizes, or is in the process of realizing its own true identity, and is not, and to get you out of the thinking that it's just a fictional world. Which, like, because it's weird, because a lot of people say that, like, oh, fourth wall breaking, like, I really don't like it because it breaks my immersion and all that kind of stuff. Here it's actually done for the sake of trying to build immersion, because the game is not about a traditional fictional storyline. It's not about a character who isn't real going on a mission or a quest that never happened to do a thing that is just virtual. Like, it's a game about the nature of that stuff. It's about the nature of fiction and not a piece of strictly fiction itself. If that makes sense. I'm gonna, like, I'm dangerously getting close to just going on a narrative ramble here, but that's the point at a very basic level of what is going on here. And this, as I said, just asks you to press escape, and there's nothing else you can do, so you've got to do that eventually. So you press escape, the game is paused, which conveniently teaches you how to pause the game. And and how to quit the menu or whatever. I mean, it's a pretty obvious thing, most people guess the escape button or whatever, but just a handy bonus thing on the end there as well, teaches you that, and shows the door appears there. It's interesting, a lot of players at this point think, oh, maybe there's going to be a lot more stuff like that, maybe it's going to get really weird and do a lot of like crazy fourth wall stuff, like pause the game or do stuff outside the game and have more of these sort of meta mechanics, if you know what I mean. And I'm actually like, whenever players say that and they get excited for that stuff, I'm disappointed that there isn't more of it in the game. Like, this is really one of the only real examples, no, not the only example, but like one of the only examples of that actual kind of thing being built in mechanically or doing something. Like, there's nothing else in the game where you pause and then something appears kind of thing. There is a little bit of a secret that you can exploit if you pause multiple times. I won't show you that now, but I mean, if you experiment with the pause menu, there is some stuff going on there, but it's not mechanically linked to the main game. So, we'll pass through here, and now we're in this room. This room used to be part of... This room and the next room used to essentially be one room. That was like a really complicated level where there were like... You can see how there's like two tiers here, like two floors kind of thing. They're split between the two realities or perspectives. But there's like these two lines you can kind of see, yeah. Before there was a level with 3 of those, and they were 2 blocks apart, not 1 block apart. And you had to do a lot of like shifting your character around, working out how to get him to different heights and different positions to get keys and stuff. And it was a good level, but it was just like, it was just this sudden enormous ramp of like complexity for just one room. Like, you had to spend all this time thinking about it, and the level just took too long to feel satisfying, and it was really annoying if you screwed up in some way towards the end of it and had to restart new level from scratch for this point in the game. So I decided to simplify it down into these 2 rooms that expressed all the ideas, or most of 90% of the ideas that original room had, but in more smaller, concise nuggets. So here in this room we just need to get this guy over to this key, and I've used key blocks here as a way of controlling the path that the player has to take. So the guy on top here has to get to this key on the left, and you can do this by using the mechanic you just learned about using this guy as kind of a bridge. Some players will do this again here, but you can always just, you know, jump and swap kind of thing. He gets to that, and then he drops down to here. Now, a lot of players will then assume, right, they'll swap back to this guy and be like, alright, I need to get to this key, and so they'll kind of roll reverse or whatever and try, sorry, no, what they'll do, that would be the right thing for them to do. What a lot of players will try and do is just immediately try and get back to the door without realizing that this key needs to be gotten, or, right, without it having kind of clicked in their head that it's the other character who needs to get the key. And as I say, as obvious as it may seem about these sort of things sometimes, that this guy can't see this key and this guy can, you'd be really surprised about how much it trips players up with there being these 2 realities, which guy can see which at any point in time if they're not focusing on that specific element at that specific point. But the correct solution here is just to, when you've got this key, to move this guy to here, and like he forms like this very clear like staircase for this guy to climb up, and it's like right next to where you get the key. It's very, very easy, and it's like the only other place you can stand on this platform. The key is there, and here is there. Like, it's very, very simple for the player to reach that kind of conclusion. Get up here, get this key, bring him back underneath, and it's got this nice flow to it. Does this level? I quite like how it ended up working out. And there was some stuff going on narratively there about just more stuff that's kind of making the player ask questions, but I don't want to talk too much about it. So yeah, and this room was kind of the rest of it. So like here I've gone back and I've increased the difficulty in this very, very mild logical step kind of way by just increasing the distance between the 2 tiers, which was an element that was in the original room. Just forcing the player to do this whole jump, swap, jump kind of thing, as opposed to just needing to stand on the other guy's head in order to reach the place. Now you actually have to involve the jumping and swapping in mid-air thing. And it's a completely symmetrical room this time, so like it's just that one thing. You swap both sides like that. the same thing on each side and then get the guy back up to the other side. Through there. And again, this level will trip people up in the same way that the original room tripped people up, and the room before can sometimes as well, in that like players are very afraid, like very at the start for example, like even after they've swapped to this guy for example, if they like come down here and they already know that he's standing on a surface, but they're very hesitant to swap back to this grey character now, even though they know when they do he'll be stood on a thing, because right now what they can see is he stood on nothing, and there's still something in their heads that will often make them not 100% confident that that floor is coming back when they swap, because it's very hard to envision these two complete worlds at once. But nonetheless, the solution is do this. Very symmetrical level. Now this level has a little bit of a trap, or I guess you say a misdirection built in that it looks immediately quite simple if you don't think about it at all. You can rush over to the left of this character, get that key, and then go through the door, right? But the level is complex looking enough that most players can immediately assume that it's not as simple as that. And most players catch on really, really quickly, as a lot of you watching will have already caught on, even if you haven't played the game now, that the key blocks here are going to disappear when I pick up this key, and I'm just going to fall to my doom. So, in order to fix that, the only thing, like, this is the only guy who can see that key, he can't see the key. So he does need to pick up that key, so he needs a way to survive after picking it up, which means we need to get the other guy across to it. That's the logic involved here. Now, I like this because, like, it's a trap that most players will not fall for. Some will. Some will just rush over here, grab the key and be like, ah, crap, or whatever. But then they go, oh, no, I get it, or whatever. They don't feel too bad about it. But the majority of players will not fall for this. They're not going to run across and grab that. Most players will see it and be like, nah, I see what you're trying to do there. And they feel smart as a result of it. They realize that they can't just run and grab that key. So they sit, they think about it for a second, and right, right, okay, I need some way to be able to fall safely. This guy can actually stand over there if I get him there, so I can bring him across like this. Using this, you see how this guy stood at the bottom of like a funnel here that kind of just draws the character towards the bottom? And like it's a very weird hole to exist otherwise, and nothing really in the game, no blocks really have been placed in the game for like no mechanical purpose at all, with the partial exception of that area of the game where you kind of go back and forth and there's that wall on the other side. Other than that specific spot, like there are not really any blocks that exist like for no reason at all, and that's been very consistent throughout the game, so the player has reasonably good reason to assume that this gap here is there for a reason. And this whole sort of shape is here for a reason, is just to allow you to get back up, really. But this hole here is there for the reason of it being perfectly in line to sort of sit you in a spot where you can cleanly jump over like that. I would have liked him to have been perfectly in the middle there, but then in order to do that I would have had to like reduce like the size of this platform by 1, which could have worked, but it would have been less clear that you had to stand on this guy's head, and if I increased this by 1, it would have actually been possible to sort of make that with like a max distance jump. As you can see, he nearly makes it like anyway. So it had to be kind of that shape, but I think it works nicely enough anyway. So you put him underneath there, come, you grab this key, and you get over there. Right, so in this room, interesting thing with this room is that, well, I'll talk about that at the end, but essentially all you have to do with this room is position a guy on each of these little blocks, and then use the other guy to get across to use the key. The solution itself actually pretty simple. The jumps are a little tricky because you're not just going across 3, you're going across 3 and up 1, which is like not quite max distance, but like almost. So the jumps can be a little tricky. but generally the solution is pretty clear and most people get it pretty quickly. The main thing to notice about this room that a lot of people actually won't until the very next screen is the fact that there are 2 doors here. Each character can see a door, and they both unlock in the exact same way, but they're in a different spot. And you go through here and it says, maybe oh, hey, wait, were there 2 doors just now? Because it's actually very, very easy for a player to not even notice that there were 2 doors. But then the moment they read that text and they think about the previous room, they're like, oh wow, there actually was 2 doors, wasn't there? Because they think about the layout of the room, and they think about the block with the door on it, and then they remember that the other block had the door on it as well. And it's very easy for the player to envision where the other door would have been if there was 2 doors, and so it makes sense in their head that there was 2 doors, so then it's like, oh, there actually was. There were 2 doors in that room. And I'll leave it to you to think, based on everything I've told you about what I've been doing with the game narratively so far, what the significance of there being 2 doors in that room is, and whether or not you think it has an impact on the game mechanically or narratively. But that's the strategy I use to sort of draw your attention to that fact. And no matter which door you pick, you always end up in this room here, I'll say that much. But yeah, it's something I want players to think about, but I'm not going to say too much strictly about. So, anyway, with that aside, this is one of the first... I'm not sure. This might be the first room where you actually have 3 characters. I ended up avoiding this a lot in the game, because it's not that comfortable to play. Like, the solution here is, like, it's pretty straightforward. Like, you move between these guys and you basically use one another, again, just to fill in gaps to get to where the keys are. The last key is a little bit hidden because it appears in the text, which is not completely ideal, but I also, like, I like that and I don't at the same time. So he gets in there, and then I have to, like, move him out of the way. Like, the problem with 3 characters is, like, when you have 2 characters, like, the swapping is very simple. You press a button, you swap between them. You are one, you can be the other. And you are the other, you can be the first one again. It's very, very simple. In this, like, you're going through them in a cycle of from 1 to 2 to 3 to 1 to 2 to 3. And there's no way to go backwards in that sequence. I experimented at one point with having it so you could press down and swap, and it would, like, swap you back through the sequence, or, like, pressing a number on the keyboard to swap to a specific person, but I didn't like the complexity that added, and I couldn't think of a nice way to teach it, let alone be happy with it as the actual system of, like, swapping between characters. So while I kept some of these rooms because they are still very interesting and they add a bunch more potential depth, the image you'll see later on, there's some rooms with, I think, like, the most I ever get is like 4 characters. But I don't like the feeling of having to swap all the way between the 3. I sometimes do, because it sometimes creates very interesting puzzle flows and interesting situations, where, like, I'm this guy and I can swap to the first guy, but I can't swap back to the second guy, so the first guy better be somewhere safe, or I better be ready for it and ready to just very quickly swap so he doesn't fall to his doom or something. There is some interesting stuff there. But largely, like, and generally feedback from players on it as well is that it's a bit uncomfortable to play levels with 3 or 4 characters, and I agree. And again, like, I would have probably wanted to do something with the controls, or think of, like, a new way to handle it if the game was going to be something more complex or larger than I wanted it to be, but it wasn't going to be that, and I wanted to keep it simple and wanted to keep it straightforward and wanted to get as much as I could out of something small, so I didn't want to go down that route of exploring new controls, new ways of handling lots of different potential characters and so on. So really all I did was sort of use these levels minimally and construct them very carefully to try and minimize sort of the, I guess, kind of clunkiness it might add with there being unable to swap backwards, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that's that level. I'm now at the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to end this episode part here on this room. It's a cool room, I like this room. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching, catch you guys next time. See you guys.